Welcome everyone to the Place and Resources Scrutiny Committee of Dorset Council on Tuesday 11th of May 2021. Welcome to any members of the public watching this meeting. For the benefit of the public, I'm Councillor Shane Bartlett, Chairman of the Place and Resources Scrutiny Committee. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Council has had to put in place measures to enable the Council's decision-making process to continue whilst keeping safe members of the public, councillors and Council staff, in accordance with the government's guidance on social distancing by applying new regulations issued by government for holding meetings from remote locations. This meeting is being live streamed to the public and recorded both by audio and video. Public participation will take the form of written questions as opposed to public speaking. Can I please remind all councillors to ensure that their mobile phones are switched to silent during the meeting. For the benefit of the public, I will now take a roll call to establish which councillors and officers are present. Councillor Andy Canning.
Here.
Councillor Rod Adkins.
Here.
Councillor John Andrews.
Here.
Councillor Brian Heatley.
I'm here.
Councillor Mike Parks.
Morning, Chairman, present.
Councillor Mark Roberts.
Morning, Chairman. I'm present.
Councillor David Shortell.
Good morning, Chairman. I'm present also.
Councillor David Took. And Councillor Bill Trite.
Present, Chairman.
Thank you, members. Officers attending for overall agenda are John Selgren, Executive Director of Place, Jonathan Mayer, Corporate Director, Legal and Democratic Monitoring Officer, Lindsay Watson, Senior Democratic Services Officer, and Pauline Weld, Producer for the meeting. Other officers will be introduced for each agenda item and will make themselves known. So if I can move to item 1 on the agenda. Apologies, please, Lindsay.
Chairman, we've received apologies from Councillor David Took.
Thank you. Members, are there any declarations of interest? Okay. If any member, if they have a declaration of interest, they could make that known during the meeting before we enter into the agenda item, I'd be grateful. Thank you. Moving to item 3, the Chairman's update. I have a short statement to read. So it's a Chairman's statement on virtual committee meetings. At the annual meeting of the Council on the 4th of May 2021, it was agreed that all Council meetings are not executive in nature will continue to be held virtually from the 7th of May 2021 until such time as social distancing requirements are removed, currently scheduled to be lifted on the 21st of June 2021. Where a decision is required, committee members will express a minded to decision in respect of recommendations set out in officer reports, with decisions being taken under officer delegated authority in the light of minded to decisions expressed by members in the virtual meetings. The reports on today's agenda are for review by the committee to seek comments from the committee and support for the direction of future work, and also provide the committee with information to determine if any additional areas should be added to the forward plan for further review. To confirm, there are no items on this agenda that require a decision to be taken under officer delegation. If I can move to agenda item 4, public participation. Do we have any questions, Lindsay?
Yes, Chairman, we have received one question from Rob Smith, who is a Lyme Regis Town Councillor. Could the producer just display the question on the screen, please? Just go back to the public one. That's lovely. Thank you. OK, so the question from Rob Smith, Lyme Regis Town Councillor. The grid capacity scoping report, which the Place and Resources Scrutiny Committee is due to consider on May the 11th, should also highlight another issue which is impacting local residents seeking to decarbonise their homes and cars. The government's 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution to get us to net zero includes installing 600,000 heat pumps by 2028. Part of Dorset Council's role in helping deliver these aspirations and the aims of its own climate and ecological emergency strategy is to facilitate these changes, which will make a major contribution to cutting carbon emissions. Unfortunately, residents who have installed electric vehicle home chargers and subsequently plan to install an air source heat pump are increasingly discovering that our electricity infrastructure is insufficient. They find themselves paying between £300 and £3,000 additional to the cost of these already expensive systems to upgrade the electricity supply to their homes. This infrastructure is owned and controlled by the distribution network operator, the DNO, in our case Western Power Distribution, regulated by Ofgem. Householders who are trying to support the government's environmental targets should not have to foot the bill for upgrading the DNO's infrastructure. Surely, if the government wants to encourage domestic users to adopt electric vehicles and renewable heat technology, these extra cost barriers should be removed. Will Dorset Council take a lead and lobby the relevant DNO and Ofgem to absorb this cost themselves, to remove this significant financial burden for residents who are already planning to make a substantial investment in support of the government's and the council's targets? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lindsay. And I believe that we have the portfolio, Councillor Walsh, to answer.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. And thank you, Councillor Smith, for your question. This is a national policy issue which the government is aware of. The council understands that the government is currently working with Ofgem, distribution network operators and partners, through the Charging Futures Forum to develop equitable future network charging policies aligned with climate change aspirations and the need for significant increase in electric charging infrastructure and domestic commercial heat pumps. The council will continue to monitor these discussions and act accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. So I move on to agenda item 5, questions from members. We have a question from Councillor Carol Jones, but I'm going to take it in agenda item 6 after the portfolio has given their report. Okay, so if I move to agenda item 6, grid capacity scope and document, with the portfolio holder to present, I believe.
Thank you, Chairman. As always, you are correct. So members of this committee and those of the Reset and Recovery EAP have been rightly concerned as to whether there is currently significant or sufficient rather electricity grid capacity in the Dorset Council area to meet existing and future demand, particularly regarding development being considered in the emerging local plan, and also the increased demands arising from the implementation of the climate and ecological emergency strategy, covering greater use of heat pumps, electric vehicle use and renewable energy installations. Firstly, Chairman, because essentially it must be realised that energy supply is the statutory responsibility of the energy providers, which are required to meet the energy demands generated by new development. Developers do actually pay for grid connectivity directly to the supplier. Consequently, it is not part of the planning process and is not funded through Community Infrastructure Levy or Section 106 agreements. Chairman, that does not mean that we throw our hands in the air saying not our problem, but rather we have endeavoured to work closely in consulting the energy providers during the preparation of our local plans, so that they can comment on whether there are likely to be any problems with energy supply to that being proposed, and so that they can build in the proposed future scale and pattern of development to their development plans. Sadly, in the past, it is true to say that we have not always received responses to our consultations from the electricity provider, and we have therefore made greater efforts to engage with them. As your members are aware, the electricity providers are currently preparing their local area network plans to guide their future development and investment. As members will have read in the appendix to this report, Dorset Council has been proactive in engaging in this process and has submitted our consultation response, setting out the Council's aims and ambitions as set out in the Climate and Ecological Emergency Strategy, our economic growth strategy, and the development proposal set out in the first consultation document on the local plan. Through our response to the consultation on pages 32 and 33, you will have read that we have flagged up a series of known local grid capacity problems, which are currently being explored by the provider, SSEN, Scottish and Southern Electricity Network. Members may be aware of other areas where there is anecdotal evidence of supply problems, and these can also be raised with the provider as identified at point 3 of the recommendations in this report. As we have evidenced, we are taking a proactive approach to engaging with the electricity supplier, both in the preparation of our local plan and responding to their consultation. Having said that, there may still be existing or potential problems areas across Dorset that could constrain our ambitions for growth and for responding to the climate and ecological emergency. Recommendation 2 in this report, Chairman, reads that members consider whether additional consultancy work on grid capacity should be commissioned. Now, members may consider that additional work is appropriate through outside specialist consultation, but such consultancy work will be an additional cost that had not been previously budgeted for. There are reserves in place to fund all the costs associated with the local plan preparation, but this will put additional pressure on them. Now, officers suggest that if such work is thought necessary, it be commissioned from the highway and engineering consultants with which the council has an existing framework agreement in place, and that the results of this work be reported back to this committee. Thank you, Chairman.
Shane, you're on mute.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Walsh, for your report. If I could now move to Councillor Carol Jones, who has 2 questions. I'll take them individually, please. Councillor Jones, would you like to give your first question?
Thank you very much. The reason for this question, quite simply, is that I don't know if members are aware that there are already costs to Dorset Council for not having this infrastructure in place. And my question is, what is the cost to Dorset Council for the lack of capacity on the North Dorset Business Park, and in general for the town if house building is unable to proceed? And can this be clawed back from the provider at all? And if not, is the provider not taking their responsibility seriously? And can we do anything about it?
Councillor Walsh, could you answer, please?
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, Councillor Jones. I know how hard you've worked to sort out this issue in your local area. Now, in answer to that question, the limited amount of electricity capacity will act as a constraint on the full development of North Dorset Business Park in the foreseeable future. And until such time as additional grid capacity can be made available economically. The council is working with all the interested parties that have previously purchased plots of land within the park from the council to maximise the development of the site and support the creation of as many local job opportunities as possible, given these constraints. The council has yet to finalise how best this might be achieved and any associated costs. So I'm sorry you did not receive the answer that you wanted in pounds and pence, but we have not yet got that information. We will continue to pursue it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My second question is, as there are a number of areas with a lack of grid capacity, does there have to be some sort of priority list drawn up? And if so, whose responsibility is this, and how would this be decided upon, and can we influence it, basically?
Thank you again. And I hope you'll see the responses to the consultation that we have actually responded to, and in that way we have actually given some input into what we need for the future. But in answer to your question, the energy providers will develop their priorities for future investment through the local area network plans currently in preparation. And we have responded to this consultation in order to inform that process. We can influence those choices through working with them on the development of their plans and our local plan. And the further work should help us to do that more effectively.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. Is that okay, Councillor Jones?
Yes, I'd just like some oomph behind it, really, but I'm sure that we as a council know that. Thank you.
I think you speak for a great many across the chamber. Thank you.
Chairman, could I just say, sorry to interrupt, could I just say we are putting oomph and my considerable weight behind this issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Your words, not mine, Councillor Walsh. Can I now move to non-committee members' questions, please? Do I have any? I've seen nothing in the chat bar for an RTS to speak, but is there any member? Councillor Ireland.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Bartlett. It's just a comment and also a question. So I'm fortunate to have a couple of electric vehicles, and I don't have a heat pump at the moment. But if I did, it would cause me a problem with my house supply, because as many of our residents are in rural areas, the local grid capacity is insufficient. So it's not about new grid capacity, it's also about existing grid capacity is insufficient. But one of the things that's just been raised by Councillor Jones is, you know, we're adding conditions to planning applications. I sit on the Western and Southern Planning Application Planning Committee. We've been adding over the last 2 years conditions on developments, from big ones on Littlemore Road to smaller ones of 30 or 40 houses, and the conditions have been to supply electricity charging points for vehicles, either off-road or on-road. And it seems to me that if we're applying these conditions, it may be possible. Maybe when the developer actually goes to build the application, you know, the development, they may not have sufficient grid capacity. So I'm just wondering how the conditions we've imposed and the lack of capacity down the line is going to impact on those. I suspect the developer would just come back and try and get that removed, which is obviously not what we want, because if we're going to have people with electric cars from 2030 onwards, you need to be able to charge at home, basically, or on the street outside your property. That's my question. If that is it obvious? What are we going to do about it?
Councillor Walsh, or an officer?
Thank you. If I can just give my point, and then I'll hand over to Hilary Jordan. One of the things we've got to look at, we're planning now for the future. Now, when I'm talking with people about our climate change emergency, it's fine talking about now and electric charging points, but by the time a lot of these developments that Councillor Ireland was talking about come to actually be built after they've received planning permission, you're talking 5, 10, 15 years, some of those. So we must write into our plan something everlasting. That's not the right thing to say, but whatever is appropriate at the time, whether it is electric, whether it's hydrogen, we must ensure that we put into our plan that whatever is needed at that time is then put into place. I mean, if we say that we want electric charging points everywhere and then we've gone hydrogen, that's not a lot of use. So we need to make sure this is current with whatever comes forward at the time. So can I invite Hilary Jordan, who's head of planning, to come across and say something?
Certainly, Miss Jordan.
You've just promoted me, David. I'm service manager for spatial planning. But yes, basically this is the reason why we want to do this further work. We know that in our emerging local plan, we're wanting to explore all the policies we can introduce around things like electric charging points, but we're going to be in a much firmer position if we're aware of the capacity and have talked to the providers about what we can do if it's insufficient. So this is really why we're trying to get more into this issue and explore it so that we can be confident that we can achieve these aims. It's very much the climate change agenda that has led to these concerns arising.
Thank you. Councillor Ireland, does that satisfy your question?
Yeah, it does, but I'm pretty sure Councillor Walsh is aware you won't be getting hydrogen for domestic cars. There's not a chance. It's going to be electricity. So.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I've got Councillor Batstone, who I believe wants to make a statement and possibly a question.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. I couldn't unmute. Having heard the discussions this morning, I'm just wondering whether I need to go and buy a horse, then I'd have mobility, methane gas and manure for the garden, but there you go. Could I say that I thoroughly support the proposal for the use of a consultant to undertake a proper study of the grid capacity available in Dorset. Carol has outlined the problems with the North Dorset Business Park and indeed capacity within Sturminster Newton. And unfortunately, that's rather come as a surprise, and it shouldn't have done, to those of us involved. were I in a position to vote on this committee, I would be supporting the proposal to have a thorough look at just what the grid capacity is in Dorset. So that's my my statement, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patstone. Up next to speak, I have Councillor Fry.
Morning, Chair. I support this recommendation for a review into what's going on a consultant, but I'd also like them to include in that the use of domestic PV solar panels on domestic houses. We've put on a 4 kilowatt system on the top of our house that will pay back over 11 years, but we weren't able at that time to put a bigger system on. I don't think the system is clear enough of what people can put on their houses, and we're missing an opportunity to gather and generate solar power from the rooftops of all the houses in Dorset. So I would like that to be included somewhere with batteries and everything, because we can go a long way towards increasing our capacity by doing so. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fry. Ms Jordan, do you have a comment on that?
Yes, having had some initial conversations with the consultants who are going to be carrying out the work, we hope, I think that's definitely an issue they will be considering, the opportunities for putting energy back into the system as well as taking out. So they would definitely be taking account of that.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay, I have no other members that are wishing to speak in the chat bar requesting to speak. So I'm going to move to the committee members' questions, and after that we will then go into the committee debate. So could I have questions from the committee, please? Okay, so if I kick it off.
Councillor Heatley has indicated a request.
I don't have it on my. Okay, I don't have it on my chat.
He's on mine. He's next after Les Fry.
Yep, it's just come through now, and so is yours, Councillor Canning. The joys of virtual meetings. Councillor Heatley.
Thanks, Chair. A very simple question, which I couldn't find the answer for in the report, but maybe it's there. What's the time scale of this plan for grid capacity? I just couldn't find a reference to that. Is it the same sort of time scale as our local plan, or is it different?
I think it is to fulfil the 17-year plan. Ms Jordan?
Yes, that's right. We'd be looking at the timescale of the local plan and looking at the development proposed over that time and the assumptions we're making about increased use of electric cars along with our other policies.
Thank you. Councillor Canning?
Yes, I find myself in a difficult position, actually. In principle, I have no problems really in theory supporting this, but it seems there's a lack of real meat to the report. In your questions in the answer to your question to Councillor Carol Jones, you were saying you couldn't say how much the costs were in one particular industrial park in Dorset. So presumably you don't have the information for any of the others either. So we don't know how much potentially the costs are involved with the work that needs to be done. I can't see anywhere where you said how much the cost of the consultancy will be. To bear that in mind. So are we talking about spending £100,000 to get £200,000 of improvement, or what's the ratio there? And also, what was the final point? Consultant, and I can't remember what the point was.
I'll get an answer to that one while you have to think about that. Yeah. Councillor Canning. So, Ms Jordan.
Yes, we've just started early discussion with WSP, the consultant, so we haven't yet had a cost put to that. Our rough estimate is that we're perhaps talking around £50,000 for the work, but obviously we need to have those discussions. We're also talking to them about the actual scope of the work, and certainly they have warned us that they can't necessarily get hold of all the information down to a very detailed level. So what we will be doing is setting them a brief and then getting them to come back to us with what they can and can't do. So I'm afraid that's why the report is a little vague at the moment, because we've not had the full proposal from them. But we will go through that process, discussing that with them before we sign up and agree this. But
okay.
So that's really, we're still in the process a bit at the moment.
Right. I can appreciate that. You're saying though that it doesn't. Well, you're planning to switch money from within the existing budget. So the question is, I suppose, which follows from that is, what are you not doing to cover the cost of this? What's fallen off the edge at the other side of the budget?
At the moment, we have a budget of money in reserves for all the work associated with the local plan, and at the moment we're principally spending that on a variety of evidence-based studies, of which this would be an extra one. Clearly we also need to fund the cost of the public examination, and there is a risk if we run out of money at the end, we would still be having to pay for that examination, so we might have to find a little bit of extra money at that stage. But it may be that it can be dealt with within the local plan reserves budget.
Okay, so in other words, in next year or 2 years' time, there might be some extra sum that needs to be found. That's what you're saying.
Yes, if that's the case, if we've overspent it, yes.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Did I understand that you have been in consultation with the finance team on Dorset Council concerning this consultancy?
Not yet, no. At the moment, I've just been assuming that we would take it from the local plan reserves. Okay,
thank you. Okay, so moving on for question. I see that it's in terms of the future power supply. Obviously, we're going to move to a green energy to fulfil our commitments in Dorset Council, and it would appear that we're going to need to be lobbying for increased investment to be able to achieve that, which presumably from central government, and I guess there will be some private investment going on as well. In order to kickstart this, though, do we know what we have set aside internally in terms of funding? What percentage overall that is needed, and what percentage of that would come out of internal funding? Have we got any figures along that line?
Chairman, I'm not aware of that. I think principally we'd be lobbying and dealing with the providers to try and persuade them to make changes, but I don't know if others present have more detailed answers on that.
Okay, I'm just thinking in terms of the it says in the report concerning solar panel farms and that type of thing. We're not looking to actually invest at this time in that infrastructure ourselves.
We've not got any definite proposals, no.
Okay, thank you. Okay, just bear with me. Okay, the other question, of course, concerning this is that I'm rather surprised that the consultation between the energy providers and Dorset Council would appear to have been historically sometimes a bit lax, which I'm guessing that is why we're in the position we're in with some grid capacity gaps across the county. Are we expecting any type of statutory law change from government to enable this, to make life easier for particularly rural counties such as ours? Because it does seem strange that in the 21st century we are struggling to get electric grid capacity within our county. And is this because the energy providers have been dragging their feet over this because it will impact on their profits if they have to put that type of infrastructure in?
I think potentially one of the advantages of commissioning WSP to do this work is that they have more inside knowledge of these processes and what they could help us with how to lobby most efficiently. But certainly it's been positive, the fact that we have been able to input to this recent consultation by the energy provider, but I'm afraid despite additional efforts we still didn't have comments from them on the recent local plan consultation, so it has been really difficult getting getting a sense from them of where there might be future problems. So I think that's something that the consultants will be able to help us with, just getting a bit more inside information and understanding of where we should be most effectively putting our efforts.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Andrews to speak.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My question was just based around the so if we don't get an answer from the network plan, does that mean we have to hold up the building when we come to issuing our local plan? Because if we haven't got power, we can't build, surely. So the sooner they do that, the better. And I think leaving their voice to say that they can provide till we actually publish our local plan is a bit late. The horse is already bolted.
Thank you. Ms. Jordan.
Yes, well, as Councillor Walsh explained at the start, legally they are obliged to provide the supply for development, so we can't use that as a reason to refuse planning permission. Now, obviously, there are problems that could stop developments proceeding after they've got permission. So again, the purpose of doing further work is to try and understand these issues in advance and maybe identify where there might be problems arising from the particular distribution of development we're looking at, and whether that can influence our decisions.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Andrews. Excuse me. Obviously, with the green renewable energies that we've got that are going to be needed coming on, which is going to obviously have a significant impact upon our grid capacity as it stands at the moment with the electric charging points and such like. It was somewhat restrictive, I thought, the report in terms of where we're going to get that energy provision from going in the future. I didn't see anything in there about the hydrogen provision that may be coming in and whether that may ease some of the electric need in future, and also tidal and wave power, getting energy source from tide and wave power was not very well covered within the report, and I know that is a difficulty within that area in terms of research and development funding for that particular green energy. But I just wondered the feelings on that with Dorset Council, whether that's something we could pursue. Not obviously to fund it, but whether or not we could have an input into opening up that dialogue and those discussions with those private investors.
Well, certainly, Chairman, the examples in the report were examples of issues where we're aware there are implications for the electricity supply. We weren't intending to take too narrow a focus on potential energy sources, and I'm sure that the consultants can look into that. But I think Matthew had asked to speak as well just now.
Yeah, I've seen that, Ms. Jordan. Thank you. Mr. Piles.
Good morning, Chair. So Matthew Piles, Corporate Director, Economic Growth and Infrastructure. I think the point I was just going to make is we need to do this assessment to understand how the existing and future capacity across the Dorset Council area will affect our ambition. And the reason why I say the ambition is we can then have a discussion back with members about renewable energy and what we can do to help. I think it's very clear from the members' questions today as there's concern, and in some respect this is the oomph that we need to understand what the problem is to come back to future discussions, if that makes sense, Chair.
It does, Matthew, thank you. Councillor Heatley.
Thank you. I'm inclined to think that a consultancy study would be a good idea, but I am just a bit worried about the scope. The concentration seems to be here on making some prediction of the demand for electricity, mainly from new uses like new vehicles and heat pumps and so on and so forth. But following Councillor Fry and also your own Marat's Chair, it seems to me that that has, in as much as I understand how the grid works, it seems to me that has to be combined with an understanding about the new and particularly the dispersed new areas of supply, such as things on solar panels on people's roofs and possibly the sort of things you mentioned, Chair, together with what might be called the middle-sized commercial providers of electricity who might not be big enough to feed into the national grid, but might well have a big influence on our local supply. I mean, if you're talking about a huge offshore wind farm, that's probably not particularly connected to our local grid. It probably goes straight into the national grid. I don't know, I'm speculating here, but it does seem to me that that's a slightly different issue. So that if you have substantial amounts of electricity going the other way across the network, it seems to me that this must have an impact on the size of wires you need and so on and so forth, and you can't consider it without thinking about those things. The other thing that's not been mentioned at all, and which is connected with that, one of the proposals that has been made, and I've never been terribly convinced about it, but it's around, is that one way to get storage into the system is to send electricity back to all those electric vehicles that are plugged in overnight, charge them up, and then take the electricity away from them at a later time in the day. Now, if you're going to use a dispersed storage system of that kind, once again, it affects the size of the wire that's going to go into people's houses. I'm just concerned that we get the scope of what we're looking at correct, and that it addresses all the possibilities, and many of them are just possibilities that are around, and the flow's going both ways, not just one way.
Thank you, Councillor Heatley. Yes, I agree. I think that the scope is going to be important in this, and we shouldn't actually restrict ourselves to a very narrow view on how we're going to get that energy provision in the future. Mr. Piles, you wish to speak?
Sorry, Chair, if I may, just to reassure members of the committee that exactly, Councillor Heatley, we are looking at impact. We're also looking at anticipating increase in domestic energy use and business energy use, and including the renewable energy installations and solutions. And what we're trying to do is get a strategic view where we can then understand where the problems are and come back for a future report and a future discussion, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Piles. Did you have anything to add, Ms. Jordan, at this time? No?
I think just as we've said already, that the scope for this work has not all been set. We are developing it in discussion with the consultants, and it's absolutely right that issues of potential for electricity generation and feeding into the system will be part of it as well.
Thank you. Mr. Selgren, you should speak.
Thank you, Chairman. John Selgren, Executive Director for Place. I just wanted to perhaps address one or two of the points that members have been discussing in that part of the discussion, and particularly, Chairman, the questions that you'd raised. So, to begin at the beginning, this is a scoping piece of work, as my colleagues have indicated, and that's important that Dorset Council has a sound and independent assessment of the likely future need that mirrors and matches the work that's been done around the aspiration for growth, as will be expressed in the emerging local plan. So that's the first bit. The second is that, in very simple terms, and I do accept this is a generalisation, but this is in simple terms how it works. The regulator in relation to energy has a significant role in terms of determining what can and can't happen, and sets a framework within which the electricity generators put forward their plans based on the work that they do to assess future demand. So one of the reasons for wanting this piece of work that Dorset Council has done is to give the council something that can then enter into discussions with the energy providers and the regulator, and indeed government itself, around the future requirement for energy in Dorset. And I think it's that it's accepted that there are potentially some changes, and we may hear more about this in the government's forthcoming legislative programme, where the regulator may be looking to make certain changes to the regulatory system, because in short, the what the regulator doesn't permit under the current arrangements is the speculative development of energy generation facilities, but those are done to planned arrangements, and that's why on occasion we see this mismatch which members have described earlier between available supply and demand. It's because the projections that have been used don't quite align with what actually happens in practice. So what we're trying to do is make sure we've got an established baseline for Dorset Council that mirrors, as I said, our own local plan, and therefore we can engage in that debate in the future, particularly if government is minded to give the generators a little bit more latitude in terms of the facilities that they provide, because that would give us as a council the ability to have some influence in that debate. Second point I'd make is that members have quite rightly raised the question about the capacity within the council itself to do that, and I would just reference the work that Dorset Council is already well known for in relation to digital infrastructure, and indeed the Digital Dorset has had a considerable degree of success over a long period of time in making the case to government about the need to improve the digital infrastructure within the Dorset Council area. And indeed, the most recent announcement of the fact we're in the first wave of the Project Gigabit programme as an example of the success we've had with that advocacy in government of the need to improve digital infrastructure in Dorset. Conversations I'm having with the portfolio holders in the Place Directorate at present are whether we might look to do something similar in relation to energy generation, thereby building some small capacity, strategic capacity within the council that can support the council's lobbying of government, of regulators and indeed energy producers on the matter of making sure that future energy provision across the Dorset Council area does align with our ambitions for growth, both in terms of housing and employment sites. So that, Chairman, is perhaps a discussion we can return to once we've had the scoping piece of work back. The final observation, if I may, is that the Dorset LEP is also in parallel with this doing a complementary piece of work, because they are also concerned that the ambition for economic regeneration across the Dorset, that's the Dorset Council and the BCP Council areas, could well be constrained by the availability of suitable energy. So they have also commissioned a consultancy that is working as we speak, and that piece of work will complement the piece of work that you've been asked to consider this morning. But I think a general recognition that this is a particularly critical issue for us at the moment, because I think as members are only too well aware that there does appear to be the potential that our growth is held back by the availability or not of suitable energy. So that's why this study is considered a particularly important first step. But I think, as you've indicated, Chairman, this is the start of that discussion rather than being the end of it. And I do hope this committee will want to keep an overview of this matter as we move forward. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Selgren. That was a wealth of very good information there. Can I just ask, is it possible that at a future scrutiny meeting we could ask those energy providers into the room so that we could have a direct one-to-one conversation with them about potentially their future aspirations, if you like, of energy provision within Dorset? Would that be possible?
Certainly, Chairman, that's possible. What I perhaps would recommend is, once the LEP piece of work has been completed, it might be helpful to hear from the consultants there, because they've got that wider commentary, and you then might want to, as you suggested, bring some of the providers in. But you get a very good, I think, independent perspective, strategic perspective from the consultants the LEP have currently got engaged.
Okay, thank you. Okay, can I have Councillor Canning to speak?
Yes, it follows on from what John Selgren was just saying there. I think I'd like to propose that we adopt the 3 points that are in the report, but we add a fourth point. Sorry, to ask the consultants to report back to us when they've produced their report, and then find some sort of wording that also reflects what you were saying about the inviting in the network providers themselves to do a future meeting. So something that leads to, outlines where we want to go in the future with this.
Yeah,
so,
I would agree.
It's a little bit vague.
No, I would agree with that, Councillor Canning, and I'll give Mr. Selgren time to write some wording for a fourth recommendation while we continue with the discussion. Do I have any other members of the committee that wish to speak in terms of a question?
Chairman, it's Lindsay. Just to come in at that point, you've obviously had a proposal. I don't know if you want to seek a seconder for that proposal at this stage.
I haven't got the wording from. I'm hoping Mr. Selgren's going to come up with a bit of wording for that fourth recommendation at the moment.
Chairman, if I may, it's something along. I'm just starting to script something as you call me.
Yeah,
so forgive me, but I'll perhaps do this on the fly if I may. But doubtless members will steer my editorial pen. So something along the lines that the committee wishes to invite representatives of the electricity supply industry to a future meeting, and to request that the LEP review of energy capacity across Dorset is also reported to a future meeting.
Yeah, yes. Alongside the results of our own consultation as well.
Indeed so, Chairman.
Yeah, thank you. And I have a Councillor Andrews to speak.
Yeah, I've got there eventually. Yes, I'm happy to I am minded to second the proposal put forward by Councillor Canning.
Thank you. So obviously within the report, what was striking to me, and I sat on the EAP for the economy for Dorset. Dorset Council obviously is extremely keen to open up the economy in Dorset. We need to drive our economy, obviously, for the wealth of our county, for the benefit of our residents, and of course it's intrinsically important for Dorset Council anyway. And I think what came out in the report was just how bad some of our industrial estates, some of our areas of employment are being provided with their electric capacity, their grid capacity, which is quite staggering. And I'm guessing that is predominantly a historical thing where the energy providers haven't come forward and ensured that there was sufficient grid capacity in those areas. So obviously this is an extremely important piece of work. Do I have any other member of the committee that wishes to speak? Okay, so in terms of the recommendations we got before us, I think if I hear no dissent from the committee, then we approve the recommendations as laid out before us, with the fourth recommendation that was laid out by Mr. John Selgren, just now proposed by Councillor Canning and seconded by John Andrews. So if there is dissent from the committee, can I take it that we approve those recommendations, members? Okay, thank you. So I can move on to agenda item 7. The Property Strategy and Asset Management Quarterly Monitoring Report. Now, while members, I appreciate that this report is, or this strategy is actually in its early days, and I know that Dave Thompson and his team have done a massive amount of work at this, being overseen by Councillor Ferrari. And we do appreciate this is early days within this strategy at the moment. But if I could have a report, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So Dave Thompson, Corporate Director for Property and Assets. So the purpose of today is really to the committee to review and comment upon the progress in achieving the actions identified in the Property and Assets Management Strategy, the Action Plan, and any areas that we need to be given priority to. Just by way of background, obviously that in September of last year, Place and Resources Scrutiny Committee considered the methodology by which we were going to approach the review of the estate. In November of last year, we actually took the Property and Asset Management Plan to Cabinet, which was endorsed. And in December of last year, Scrutiny actually reviewed that and asked for us to give a quarterly update and progress against the 11 action points that I've identified in this paper at Appendix 1. As the Chairman has just mentioned, the report is the first such update, the status of which is probably reflected at its early stages. So as I mentioned later on in the paper, that future papers will actually have a RAG rating and also probably have more tangible financial data for the committee to consider. That stage obviously is reflected of probably some of the work that we've actually been doing since November and December. Part of that is obviously a part around discovery and research in terms of the estate. And the other major aspect is actually getting our resources into the right place. So within the Property Directorate, we've gone through a major restructuring exercise and obviously mobilising our resources so that we can actually address the issues within this plan. And I think that's one of the major issues on the 11 points. Just by way of background, I think, as I've mentioned before, that the current portfolio consists of 1,409 assets. And we've actually broken those down into two main elements. Firstly is our commercial assets, those ones which we receive rents from or income from, of which there are 355 in the portfolio. And that obviously consists from hotels and farms. And then the other element is the operational estate. This would include our schools, heritage and community assets, in which they are actually all about providing a service. For the purpose of the action plan, we actually broke down the portfolio into, as members are aware, the first three groupings. There were 223 operational assets, and those consisted of offices. It excluded those that were leased to third parties and those leased from the NHS, for which we'd pay no rent. It consists of libraries, day centres, youth centres, residential homes, and a variety of others. As I mentioned earlier, there are 355 commercial assets, and that will include our farms and our hotels, as well as our industrial and resale units. And then the third category were 520 other assets, and these will include housing assets, cemeteries and crematoria, leisure and outdoor education facilities, public conveniences, and a whole host of others. And I think the important part of that particular portfolio is this isn't just about managing our assets so that we can actually rationalise and obviously make some cost savings or generate some more income from, but there are obviously a number of assets that actually we have to manage the risk. So things like closed cemeteries or some of our infrastructure assets, like we have some private sewage plants within the estate. Those aspects need to be considered, and also we have to work out a strategy of how we deal with those and how we protect the council from some of the inherent risks within them. As I mentioned, that within the paper there are and the action plan considers 11 major points. And I think that probably if I actually run through those points one by one, and then no doubt there'll be some questions arising from them. So within the operational assets, the 223, probably 53% of those are actually recorded as offices, depot and storage locations. So we've actually undertaken a significant amount of work. And obviously, as members are aware from the last time that I came to Scrutiny looking at the Dorchester office estate, we've obviously done a fair amount of work around that particular portfolio, and I've detailed that in the report between 10.7 and 10.14. Within that portfolio, if you recall, that right at the very beginning, we actually had a team of consultants from Addison Young, and they actually looked at the portfolio. So they identified that there are 86 depots, workshops, stores, and a variety of waste collection and other facilities. Obviously, that we needed to actually understand the detail of that, and we spent a certain amount of time up to this point actually breaking that asset base down. So some of those assets are really not really stores, and they're not really hard assets, but they're mainly sort of bits of land of which we might store some chippings and asphalt on, etc., etc. And again, of the remaining part of that portfolio, a lot of those are predominantly with our adults and children's and in customer services such as our libraries. Those assets will actually be considered once we actually start to review the service plans. The second action point was really around the development of service planning. And we are very much in the very early stages of that, working with each of the directorates to understand their property requirements and how those will actually fall out, and we develop an estate portfolio to meet those needs. And again, part of that categorisation will be around things such as blueprint for change, regionalisation, etc., etc. The third action point was around the office estate, and as members are aware, we've actually looked at this in some detail. Only recently we brought forward the Dorchester office estate, and actually what we were looking at within that estate and the rationalisation and consolidation into Collerton Park. Obviously that within that estate there are a significant number of offices, and we are actually developing the plan to do that. Currently, that as members are aware, that anything that had actually leased with third parties, we're actually looking to terminate third-party leases wherever possible. And recently, as members are aware, we've actually terminated the lease for Prince's House and for Allendale House. And also that probably we're in the middle now of something like about 2,000 office moves as we move people around the estate to actually start to consolidate and rationalise, particularly within the Dorchester offices. In terms of our fourth action point, we were talking about the development of the corporate landlord. And obviously that is something that's quite important and quite fundamental for us as we start to look forward, and certainly is seen as best practice, certainly by SIPFA. We have gone some way towards that already, but there's a lot more work to actually be done. As I mentioned to you, we're very much in the early stages. Really, we were actually looking to commence this plan as from April, so we're only really 2 weeks into it. And we've got a fair amount more work to do. In terms of action point 5, governance, I think that probably as members are aware, our legal team have actually been looking at our internal governance, and particularly in terms of our capital projects and our governance capital projects. And as members have seen, certainly now we've been bringing forward both our strategies and policies around what we're going to do with the property estate, bringing forward any major decisions above £500,000 going to Cabinet, and actually bringing forward a range of policies with regard to things such as asset transfer, which are planned in the future. Action point 6 was really key for us, and as members identified last time, was really about whether we had sufficient resources to actually undertake the plan. As I mentioned to you earlier, that we have actually gone through a significant restructuring and realignment exercise within the Property Directorate, actually rebalancing our resources so that we could actually put more emphasis in terms of management and maintenance of the existing estate, but also in terms of looking at our surplus assets and what we will actually do with them going forward, particularly in relation to the 4-box model that we actually addressed previously. Retain and manage, acquire or dispose. In terms of action point 7, we talked about project delivery. So obviously part of that is about the resources to do that, but also where we were in relation to asset disposals. So at the end of the financial year, we actually completed 4 major disposals, generating about £4.6 million in capital receipts. But our work doesn't also look at the work surrounding the general estate. We're also doing some work with the Harbours Authority. So as members are aware, we brought to council at the back end of recently the freehold disposal and sale to Wayfish. But also that we're doing work on the Dorset Innovation Park in relation to the sales of land and the letting of land within the Dorset Innovation Park to obviously generate greater economic growth. So we do have a list of disposals. As I mentioned, we've made 4 right at the end of March, and at the moment we've got probably another 8 or 9 disposals actually in train. In addition to that, as members are aware, that we're heavily involved in the acquisition of St Mary's, and also at the back end of last year we acquired back our long leasehold interest in the Youth Hostel Association in Portland, and actually now repurposing that particular site. So in terms of our commercial portfolio, action point 8, We are now actually starting to relook at our farms and our future strategy for our farms, also for our hotel portfolio. But again, that's in very early days, and we need to progress that work going forward. Just in addition to that, obviously there's the strategic work associated with that, but there's also the ongoing work. It just is our business as usual. So in order just to not only support our strategic future outlook for what we're going to do with the estate, we actually have to manage it from its day-to-day point of view in terms of new leaseholds and rent reviews, as well as actually any new leases we let. So again, members are probably aware from the last cabinet, where we brought forward a new lease for the Sherborne Hotel in Weymouth, just as part of our normal business as usual activities. In terms of our action point 9, this was the review of other assets. So this is our 520 assets, plus we've got 7 other surplus assets, which we're actually currently working on at the moment in relation to the repurposing of those assets. So the surplus assets will include things such as North Quay, Firs Hill, etc., all of which will be plans which will actually be brought forward and will form part of the governance structure where we bring that through scrutiny and through cabinet. But our 520 other assets, obviously we're breaking those down now in terms of those things that we will need. There will be things such as land parcels that are either insignificant or some that might be transferred to parish and town councils. And obviously, as I mentioned before, the most important thing, or one of the most important things we're finding, is actually managing our risks within that. Again, when we talk about the action point 10, the one public estate, that is work that we still need to do. We're starting to reform the Joint Asset Management Committee, but we are working closely now with the NHS and CCG, particularly in things such as we're being asked to whether we can actually help in support of key worker accommodation, whether we've got assets available that can support that. And certainly with the CCG in terms of provision for areas such as the BBL facility in Wareham, where we're talking about a joint hub with the NHS Trust and also the CCG, as well as our own facilities. And finally, one of the action points that we had was about joint ventures. We recognise that as we start to move forward in terms of the estate, we're not actually at this moment in time sort of fallen upon one delivery model. So we might actually not only sell our assets, but we also might want to develop them going forward. And in order to do that, we will actually probably need help and support from the private sector or from others as we actually develop that. So again, I think that that's something for the future. But it will actually, as we start to bring major sites forward, we will probably need to consider what's the actual best way of delivering those sites and actually extracting the value from them. So as I mentioned to you, and I think in Appendix 1, we've actually summarised those 11 action points, which we will be tracking progress against. So the next time I think that we come to this committee, we will actually be able to provide a RAG rating. We will start to provide the tangible financial benefits that are actually coming through from the policies that we're following. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Really appreciate that. It's a very good report. And believe the portfolio holders in the meeting. I just don't know if Councillor Farrow wishes to add anything at this time. Right.
No, thank you, Chair. And I may comment at the end if there are particular questions that come out in the discussion. Thank you, Chair.
Certainly, thank you. So my first question is from Councillor Gorringe.
Sorry, Chair, I'm just having a little bit of a problem unmuting. Right, thank you. The Allen View offices in Wimborne were closed at the end of March, and I understand the reason why we closed them, because they were being leased, and we were able to go through a break clause. So that saved the council some money. But what does concern me is there isn't anything in place to replace hub offices in the eastern area. And what concerns me is residents in my area in St Leonard's and Verwood and Alderhole, if they wanted to see an officer or have a meeting with an officer, they'd have to travel all the way to Dorchester, and we're talking about over 30 miles. So could I have some kind of idea if there are plans in the future to open another hub office in the eastern area?
Thank you, Councillor Gorin. Just a point well made, because I think it was a wish of members, I believe, that hub offices would remain in place. Mr Thompson.
Thank you, Councillor Gorringe. Yes, so basically in Ferndown, we've got the Ferndown area office, and certainly in Wimborne, we've got the Hannam Centre. So again, some of the parts there is that we're actually looking to consolidate and actually ensure that we've actually got our presence in certainly in Ferndown, and in Wimborne, and in certainly the other offices that we're actually developing regionally as well.
Okay, thank you for that. Could I just ask then, is there, like in Ferndown, spare capacity in the offices there that we could have meetings?
Yes, there will be. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gorringe. Any other member from the authority who wishes to speak that's not on the committee? I don't see anything in the chat bar. So I'm going to move to Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm just a question about the dates on the plan. Are we confident that we're going to meet those dates, or does the plan, as most plans need, sometimes amending or adjusting? I'm just concerned we've got all these dates. Are we potentially going to meet them? Are you confident of being that? Have we managed to get all the staff and the resources we need to manage this ambitious, and it is ambitious, targets on this plan? That's my question, Dave.
Thanks, Councillor Andrews. I think one of the most important things is that we mentioned, and what came out of the cabinet paper in November, was actually some financial assistance in terms of feasibility studies, and that was actually we were allowed £250,000 that came from the first tranche of capital receipts. That money is actually quite important to help us, because now we've actually been able to embark on things like the feasibility studies in North Quay and Weymouth Bowl, and you're seeing some of the aspects of that work. The other part, and that's why I mentioned right at the very beginning, was actually our restructuring and rebalancing of the property directorate, so we could actually put more resource into this level of activity. The other aspect within the timescales, a lot of that is actually marshalling our resources so that we actually understand what's in there, and then we can actually prioritise out of that what we're going to do. So, for example, we can actually almost parcel off a lot of the school estate, because we won't be actually doing any sort of active management of that. What that will then allow us to do is to put that to one side, and then we can then say, well, okay, how are we now going to look at the offices and actually ensuring that we either repurpose or dispose of in the timescales that we've set out. So I am reasonably confident that that programme is achievable.
Okay, Councillor Andrews. Thank you.
Fine, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. It was a concern of mine as well. Right, I've got no other members in the chat bar at the moment, so think of your questions. Ms Thompson, just very quickly, in terms of, if you remember, we had a discussion previously about vacant properties and potential risk there was to the authority on those vacant properties, and you were going to do a piece of work on that. I just wondered how far you progressed with that and whether anything was going to come into this committee at some future date.
Yes, and in terms of some of those empty properties, obviously we recognise that potentially there are some concerns, and I think that when we looked at it, Chairman, that obviously that one of your concerns was potentially around pippins, which I think is probably the really only empty property that we're actually experiencing a degree of difficulty with. So our intention at this moment in time, as we're currently reviewing it, is obviously part of it is it's been vacant for some time. What are we going to do with it? And is it better to actually look at a demolition solution for that? And that's what we're currently looking at and seeing whether we actually bring forward that, which will then obviously do two things. It will actually reduce our holding cost, but it also probably from a health and safety perspective, and by the very fact is that we won't end up with people trespassing and potentially squatting in those buildings, then obviously it will move that risk.
Okay, and presumably as the plan moves forward, the strategy moves forward, we're going to have other vacant properties and assets. As you're working through this plan, do we have a policy or a plan in place as to how we're going to deal with those vacant properties as they become vacant, that could be vacant over a considerable period of time? I'm
hoping, Chairman, that we won't be actually holding properties for as long as we have been doing, and that we try to actually dovetail our plans so that we're working closely with the services to identify when those properties will be coming surplus, and then we can identify what's the best approach. Clearly, what we need to do is actually just be cognizant of if we're going to sell the asset, then developers will obviously want to be considering the buildings and the properties that we have and whether they might be doing something with it. Equally, what we want to do is make sure that if we are going to have a building vacant, that we've actually got proper security and proper stopping up, that we're actually securing those perhaps more securely.
Yeah, because obviously I appreciate it's an aspiration that you progress through this at speed and we don't have those vacant properties that are sitting there idle, because that's detrimental to Dorset Council, particularly in terms of its finances, having to look after empty properties that actually aren't providing any income to the authority. But of course, I'm minded to remember the Firs Hill site. You knew I was going to bring that up, didn't you? The former East Dorset District Council offices, which obviously ran into legal problems in terms of disposal of that site, and so it is still a vacant site. And I'm just wondering, as we could progress through this, I suspect that the vagaries of life as it is, that nothing runs easy, and we're going to hit financial problems, developers moving at the speed that they want to move at, and we could have various properties that are vacant for a period of time, I think.
And certainly the so if you take somewhere like the Beer Regis School at the moment, which is a surplus property, but what we've actually done is actually let that to an organisation on a short-term basis, a charity organisation on a short-term basis. So effectively that does two things for us. It actually provides a sort of caretaking type facility operation. So wherever possible, I think that we perhaps need to look at that maybe as a potential short-term issue. Certainly in that's strategies that have been pursued by other authorities. So I think there is a mix, that wherever possible that we can potentially look at them for short-term lets or things of that nature, but where the buildings are going to be empty and we're going to keep them up, I think we probably need to look at the risk, assess the risk, look at the quality of stopping up, and maybe potentially even putting their security presence.
Okay, is that potentially a piece of work that Overview need to do to formulate policy around that, or not, or is that early days yet?
Personally, I think that is an operational matter that we should just deal with. Okay. I think the problem is that we've got to be, I suppose, closer in relation to actually understanding what the issues are and what the risks are, and actually just the security arrangements that we put in place.
Okay, I've been involved in a couple short-term, as you say, those caretaker type arrangements in my ward, and I think they're a really good way to move forward as a stopgap issue. And the building is getting some use, and obviously, if the building's being used and it's not deteriorating, whereas it would be if it was just left idle and empty. So that's good to hear. Thank you. Got Councillor Canning next.
Yes, thank you. I just want to start by saying I think the amount of work your team has got through yourself is really impressive, and in a fairly short period of time, just to recognise that we've got these hundreds and hundreds of properties and all over the place, And I think it's incredible that you've developed this plan so thoroughly. So thank you very much for that. I do quite understand why, but I think one issue I would have with the whole issue, though, is we're being a bit too inward looking. I understand that because we're driven by our financial requirements, and that's necessary. But as we know from Southwark's House and North Quay and Weymouth, property issues can be controversial in the communities they're located in, and yet, unfortunately, there's nothing really in the report as it is about how we should be working with the community and explaining what we're doing and why we're doing it. I think we need to look at this in two levels. We need to look at getting on board local members so that they know what's going on in their areas and what the proposals are, and getting involved with the towns and parish councils as well. And a key part of this role has to be to improve the communications between what we're doing and what the community wants. So I'm not saying you have to meet each parish council individually, but like you were saying just then about East Dorset, if you've got an overall plan for East Dorset, getting together all the relevant people in East Dorset and going through what it is, would I think be a very productive thing to do before we start selling things off and closing things. And I certainly welcome the meetings recently that the portfolio holders done with Dorchester Town Council and Dorchester members, and appreciate that. And I think, but going forward, we need a commitment that that's going to be a regular-ish sort of thing when big issues are coming up. And I just think that maybe there should be an item 12 in here, which is public consultation work that we've undertaken to sell what we're doing, because it's not, the properties are ours, but the community feels they own them too, and feels they're important parts of the economic scene and the future of their areas. And if they're not involved with what's going on, it just causes us future headaches that we don't need, really.
Did you want to comment, Ms. Thompson?
Certainly, and obviously, Councillor Ferrari will probably comment after me.
I'll bring Councillor Ferrari in a minute. Yes,
but certainly we do recognise that, and we do recognise obviously that there's some sensitivities around a lot of these buildings. So the work that we've just recently or we're undertaking in Weymouth, as an example, with North Quay and Weymouth Bowl, was actually an example whereby there's a significant amount of time and resources gone into some of the community engagement. And we do recognise actually with some of these buildings and some of these sites that yes, we do need to communicate and get that communications strategy right as part of the individual project management.
Okay. Could I bring in Councillor Ferrari, please, portfolio holder?
Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up a few of the points that have been covered, can I start with the Councillor Canning's comms points? Well taken. I think we've done some of our projects recently really quite well, and some of them not so well. And North Quay, I think we've done a really good job of engagement with the local community, and we clearly didn't do as good a job on Southwark's House, and we've learnt lessons from that. We clearly need to have a much more focused comms strand as part of the whole exercise. Can I talk about property disposal? What we're dealing with here is not a business as usual world. If we sit there in 24 months' time and look back, we will have dealt with a huge tranche of the issues that we inherited from the mergers of the various councils. So what we mustn't do is we mustn't build an infrastructure and an operation that deals with a level of activity the like of which we have today, because it'll have gone away and we'll have a cost structure embedded in the council that won't be needed. So we need to strike a balance between putting the right level of structure in place and processing at the right speed the things that are going on. A lot of the points are well taken, though. So what we're doing is we're going to bring forward two processes, one for the disposal of low value assets and one for the disposal of higher value assets. The former is for assets that effectively we seek to give way to interested third parties, community groups, town, parish councils, those sorts of things. What we need to do with that is to transfer as many of those assets as quickly as we can from the recipient's perspective, but as cheaply as we can from Dorset's perspective. So we're going to standardise a very simple process that people will effectively say, can I have this please? And we say, under a number of criteria, yes or no. The aim is to get as many of these assets into better hands as quickly as we can. The second process is for higher value assets. Those are assets that need substantive consideration. So the assets with value, the almost inevitably with assets of value, there are alternative and competing uses. They could be sold for housing, they could be used for some community use. So we need to be taking considered judgments about how each of those. There will be a bandwidth to the number of those we can process at the same time. So what we need to do is to establish the process, work out a prioritisation mechanism so that Dorset understands what we're going to do with each of these applications and how quickly we're going to progress them. So what we're trying to do is to put some structural things in place to make to allow us to process these transfers as quickly as we can. So I think a lot of the points are well taken. Those two processes are coming forward fairly shortly through scrutiny and cabinet processes, so you'll see those in their own rights shortly. The last thing I want to say.
Thank you for that, Tony. Can I just add, would it then be all right if future reports did have that as an item in there, which is dealt with what progress would be made on that front?
I'm quite happy that we look at something that measures that, so that you've got some sight of it. The last thing that I want to mention is that Dave has ended up fulfilling a key role that he's never mentioned, because what's happened is assets has ended up as a major part of lots of our central government bids. So they're absolutely key in terms of the green energy delivery to our office estate, and they're absolutely key to our levelling up bid that's going to go forward next month. And what we've ended up in the short term is with more things to do than Dave comfortably has the resources to do. What you'd normally do in this situation is prioritise. But these government bids come once and once only. So we need to deliver those. So Dave's not talking about the other demands on his time. And again, we can't resource up for this because one day that's going to stop too. So we need to we're walking a balance between how much we spend on dealing with what's actually just a short-term spike in our activity. But if Dave misses some of his dates, it's partly because we've asked him to produce a £20 million bid to central government for levelling up or something. So that's our prioritisation, not Dave's delivery, is the issue there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Ferrari. Yeah, I think we've obviously all appreciated the sheer level, the amount of work that yourself and Dave Thompson's team has been doing over the asset strategy management plan. It is a massive piece of work with a massive portfolio of properties and assets to deal with. It was interesting that in the appendix at 10B, you'd say develop a list of potential opportunities and co-working opportunities involved in Dorset property portfolio. Do I take surrounding that is this work has already been touched upon, the work with town and parish councils to work through this programme of this asset management plan. And I just wonder whether we could have in the future reports, because we're going to be looking at this quarterly, whether we can have in a future report how that work with town and parish councils is going. I appreciate that there is probably going to be an element of the asset pool that is going to be passed over to town and parish councils, or asked if those town and parish councils want to take them on. I know that there was always a view, and quite rightly so, that nothing would be forced upon town and parish councils. But obviously there's going to be a big part of this asset management plan, I guess, because I would hope there's still an aspiration that much of the those lower end assets, as you say, would remain within local government ownership.
I'm delighted to report on something like that. Our anticipation is that the first tranche of things that will go on are effectively the long established cases. because there's lots of debates have gone on over quite a few years with various town and parish councils about this and that. Yeah. And I think what will happen first is all of those will get flushed out to the surface. We'll process that lot, and then we'll get into a more structured, okay, what do we need to do with the rest?
But hangovers from predecessor authorities.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of that will come to the surface when we.
Yeah, agree. Okay, thank you.
Can I just say, Chairman, as well, just picking up
certainly
Councillor Ferrari's point. There is a certain amount of activity in relation just to the management and maintenance of our estate. So the whole SALEX programme is actually got a heavy property involvement in it in relation to things about the decarbonisation and the works associated with that. So there is a sort of piece of work looking at the estate and the rationalisation and the increased efficiency of it. And then there's a piece of work obviously looking at the management and maintenance of the existing estate that will go along in parallel, which we're resourcing up to manage as a sort of business as usual, to actually bring in some of the things such as the climate change initiatives.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I've got Councillor Roberts to speak next. Sorry it's taken so long, Mark. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Chairman. A couple of points. One, I think colleague Tony Ferrari, when he used the term flushing, I was going to mention how bruising the experience was of trying to sort out asset transfer of public conveniences, particularly in West Dorset. And I suspect that could occupy far more time than it needs. But I also wanted to make sure that as members, we're not too insistent on timelines that might actually affect the commercial value of the big picture items, because some of those, it may not be the most appropriate time in the commercial market. And I'm aware that if we impose too tighter timelines, we may lose rather a lot of value by being too hasty or too slow. And I think we need to take advice on the most appropriate marketing method and timings.
Thank you. Do you wish to make any comment? Councillor Ferrari.
Those points were well made. Absolutely right.
Okay, Mr. Thompson.
Yeah, I mean, just picking up Councillor Roberts' points, actually, we are very conscious of just where we are in the cycle. So obviously that things like retail assets perhaps haven't got the same value currently than what they might have. So the issue about how we review those, how we evaluate them, and perhaps what the alternatives might be, I think are probably more important now than they ever have been, because if we perhaps try to keep them in their same asset class, we might not ever get rid of them, or if we do get rid of them, it will be at a much reduced value. So it's a point very well taken, and you know, and that's something that we've got to consider.
Thank you.
Okay. You satisfied, Councillor Roberts?
Yes, thank you. Very good answers.
Thank you. Okay. Just a quick one, Mr. Thompson. Just one on assurance that in terms of internally within our organisation, there's good cooperation between the Children's and Adult Services within the authority surrounding and ensuring provision is correct in the future for both vulnerable groups. Can we just have that assurance that in terms of all officer and departments are working together well over this asset management plan?
Yeah, I mean, I think as I've said in the paper, and I think we've said in the strategy actually, that service plans are actually a core and essential element. So clearly we've got to be aligned with those. We've got to understand them, both to ensure that actually that we're providing the services that we need, but at the same time ensure that we're providing them as economically and efficiently as we can at the same time.
Okay, thank you. You said in the future that this will be appearing on the performance tool that we're going to be getting shortly. It's being worked up, and that will be the RAG risk factors. So it'll be transparent, including the financial implications. Do we have any expectations to a date as to when we'll start seeing that on that performance tool?
Well, I'm hoping that the next time I come to this committee, which probably is 3 months out, we should be able to start putting those measures in place.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Okay, I've got no other member wishing to speak in the chat bar. I've got one other thing. You say it in the appendix at 11, joint ventures, legal and financial. I'd like to see a report on this coming to the Scrutiny Committee at a future date, if that's okay. Well, not if it's okay. I would like to see a report coming to this committee concerning that, because I think that would be quite an interesting piece of work to look at. Okay.
Yeah, well, certainly, and you know, as I mentioned earlier, that we, in terms of our model of delivery, it will vary. It might be different models for different sites and different approaches, and I think that each one of those will probably need to go through the normal governance in relation to the approach. So most, if not all, of those sort of sizable transactions will probably be in excess of £500,000 and will require a cabinet decision. And as part of that process, we'll obviously go through the scrutiny process as well.
Okay, that's good to hear. Thank you. Okay, members, I've got no other members wishing to speak. So at the moment, we're looking at a recommendation to review and comment upon progress in achieving the actions identified in the Property and Asset Management Strategy Action Plan and areas needed to be given priority. Lindsay, did you take sufficient notes there? Have we established the various priorities that we need to look at?
Yes, Chairman, obviously got notes of all the discussion and points raised, and I will need to schedule in the regular monitoring, the quarterly monitoring, so that for when you get these future reports, and I've got a couple of points there to discuss with Mr. Thompson in terms of some items that have been requested for the committee. So we'll pick that up outside of the meeting.
Thank you. Is there? I've got Councillor Andrews to speak in a minute, but is there any member who wishes to raise any other point we haven't covered so far? Okay, I'm not seeing anything in the chat bar. So I've got Councillor Andrews.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Excellent report. Thank you very much to all the officers involved, and I'm minded to propose that we accept the report.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Can I have a seconder, please?
I'll second, Chairman. It's Mark.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. And if I hear no dissent from the committee, then I'll take that as being approved. Okay, thank you, members. So I'm going to move to agenda item 8. That's draft Place and Resources Scrutiny Committee forward plan, which is just an oversight for the committee membership to look at our future forward plan, so you have an idea of what's coming. We are presently in discussion to be adding things to the forward plan at the moment, which aren't on this forward plan at the moment. I would say that you need to note that item Dorset Council Scrutiny Committee, adding value to Dorset's COVID-19 recovery strategy, has been removed from the forward plan for meeting on the 13th of July. It's pending further discussion to be held on the role of scrutiny in this area. Okay. So, and obviously it is members from the committee or members across the chamber can make requests to bring things onto the forward plan to be discussed by the committee as to whether they then make it onto the forward plan going forward. Okay, so I have no. So Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Chair. While I commend the recent strategy and the committee decision, or the council decision to purchase St Mary's School, I don't believe we've seen a business plan behind that. So is that something, even though the decision's been made, I know, is that something we can scrutinise? I'm just asking that question.
It is. My understanding was that the senior leadership team were going to be insistent that scrutiny takes a full and active role over the St Mary's project. I don't know if Mr. Selgren wishes to comment on that.
Thank you, Chairman. John Selgren, Executive Director for Place. So, yeah, it's my understanding that members are quite rightly keen to make sure this project is closely scrutinised. Chairman, I think it may want to reflect with your fellow chair in terms of which scrutiny committee this might come before, but that's perhaps something we can pick up outside the meeting.
Yeah, and I think obviously there's going to be some work done on doing some joint scrutiny work, but I believe the constitution needs to be slightly tweaked for that, because obviously the St Mary's project is such a massive project, it's going to overlap both scrutiny committees. Thank you,
Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Okay, I've got the monitoring officer, Mr. Mayor, to speak.
Chairman, it was simply to comment as well, just to remind members as well that there is a project board for St Mary's, so it's just a little bit of caution around duplicating the role that members are already performing in relation to the St Mary's project, and to say that members are closely involved in it already.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I'm going to move to agenda item 9, Cabinet Forward Plan. Okay, members, so you will have seen this within your agenda, and it's to ask if there's any committee members that would like to do any post-decision or retrospective scrutiny on decision making. Okay, so I'm not seeing anything in the chat bar. Any member who retrospectively looks at this and wishes to have a look at retrospectively any decision making of the cabinet, then get in touch with me and we'll have a conversation around that. Mr. Mayor, you wish to speak?
Yeah, Chairman, if I could just go back to the end of the asset management item, because I wasn't quick enough, I think, to jump in, and I just wanted, for the benefit of members of the public who will have heard the end of the item, and there was a minded to propose, and which sounded like a proposal and a seconding took place. Mm-hmm. Obviously, this isn't a formal meeting at which members are making any decision, so I didn't want people to go away with the impression that a formal decision has been made. We are in an informal meeting this morning. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. Okay, so if I've got no request to speak over the Cabinet Forward Plan, I'm moving to item 10, which is urgent items, of which there are none, and agenda item 11, which is exempt business, which again there is none. So members, at 11:37 I will close the meeting. Thank you, officers, for your time. Thank you, officers, for those who are responsible for the reports and the presentations. Very much appreciated, and thank you, members.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chairman.